Okay, I just started recording. So, hello everyone. My name is Shanika and I will be your session coordinator for today. We're happy to have you all here and we are excited to have Chantalle with us today to speak about her journey into the legal field and her career as a family lawyer. I'll let her introduce herself in just a minute. For those watching from YouTube, thank you for watching. For everyone here with us live, I hope you enjoy. So Chantal, I'll begin by asking you a couple of questions, and then in the last 15 minutes, like I explained, if students do pop in, I'll let them ask you questions. So I'll pass it on to you to introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this process. It's great that there's a channel that now can connect young lawyers or students thinking about law or that are in law school with us lawyers that have already worked and had a little bit of experience under our belt. So it's very exciting that we can chat today. My name is Chantalle Alexandra Sawision. On Instagram, I'm Chantalle Alexandra. I also have joined the club of TikTok lawyers during 2020. It started with a small group of us, but now it is, getting a lot bigger. And I'm glad to be part of that, tiny community. It's a bit of a creative outlet, which is always fun because law isn't the most creative of professions in certain respects. It can be quite rigid, but at the same time, you can get creative and depending on what practice area you're working within. I myself practice as a family law lawyer. I worked at two massive firms downtown in the financial district, dealing with high-end clientele. I've had celebrity clientele, including rock stars in the Rockstar Hall of Fame, as well as, a ton of celebrities as well. We've covered cases that have been in the news Canada-wide. After working for these two larger firms for the start of my career for essentially 6 years, I decided to leave the corporate climate, so to speak, and start my own practice with two other gentlemen that I practice in association with at present. We have 3 offices, one in Yorkville, Rosedale, and now an office more uptown in Newmarket, servicing Newmarket, Aurora, all the way up to Collingwood, really. So we're doing pretty well, and I'm very excited that this profession provides us with flexibility to be our own boss and find our own path. So that's just a little bit about me.
Well, that's awesome. Congrats on opening up the law firm. That's always great to hear. Girl boss moment. Sorry.
1 second, my light is flickering, so give me 1 sec.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, I'm back.
All right. So I understand that you went to Wilfred Laurier for political science and legal studies. If you could do us a favor and tell us a bit about your experience and your time as an undergrad, and how do you feel your program benefited your overall experience as a lawyer?
Yeah, so I actually started off in communication studies. I have the gift of the gab and I love chatting. So for me, I thought I would want to be on the news. I pictured myself as a news anchor. So I started off communication studies. Within 1 semester at Wilfred Laurier, I realized it just wasn't for me. I found I wasn't, in a realm that I was uncomfortable with. And I think I wanted that. I wanted to really learn a ton that I didn't know, which is why I decided to go into political science. Learning about international relations was something that I thought would be really interesting. Growing up living in Canada, it's a bit of a bubble. So that really spoke to me as well. I'm not going to lie, my path towards law wasn't linear. It definitely ebbed and flowed. When I had changed essentially, degrees or avenue of learning, exactly, majors in my first year, I hadn't even foreseen law as being a career I would want to go into. Again, I was still on the mindset of potentially moving into journalism and writing, which we do have a lot of as lawyers. So when I entered into the political science realm, I did what, us typical lawyers usually do, which is just try our best, work really hard. A lot of us are A-type personalities. And in doing so, I actually got some very good grades, and the dean of political science contacted me. Wilfred Laurier was actually starting a legal studies initiative. So it was one of the first years, and this is aging me, but it was one of the first years that Laurier was offering a legal studies minor. So 18 students in our year were picked to enter into this essentially minor, where we wrote a thesis in the legal realm as well. And I was one of those 18 students. And that was great because that introduced me into the realm of law. Today, now I know Laurier, amongst other Canadian universities and universities abroad, offer legal studies majors and minors. I think that was a game changer for me because I didn't know anything about law prior to starting to learn the basics in undergrad. And that really propelled me to move forward with this, career and obtaining a Juris Doctor in law. I didn't know much about it prior to. So if you aren't sure what you want to do, or if you're the type of student that, much like myself, wasn't sure where you wanted to go in life, which is very natural, I would definitely recommend just taking some legal studies courses, whether you're wanting to jump in and minor or whether you're just wanting to do some extra courses on the side. It's great to just learn a little bit about the different facets of law, and that helped me decide what I wanted to major in law school as well. So that was great. With that being said, my legal studies minor, because it was so small and we had been handpicked by the dean, I was able to obtain some really great reference letters. So the dean gave me a reference, and that was how I moved forward, with applying for law school. So that's pretty much my story. And again, it wasn't linear in any regard. I think it was in the end of fourth year that I decided that I wanted to really make a go of it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do, MBA programs, do some kind of master's in political science, or if I wanted to do a Juris Doctor. And it was really, when I, in that climate where I just didn't know what I wanted to do, that I thought, well, maybe I might as well try law school because I could leave with a degree. And even then, I knew how valuable the degree really is. I know a lot of lawyers that went through law school, started working at firms, and just wasn't for them. And they have great careers in other industries, as well as lawyers that were poached, after working in law by different corporations that are now CEOs of different corporations and now own their own businesses and aren't necessarily working in law in a traditional legal sense. So the degree definitely opens up so many doors, and I'm happy to speak about that to anyone interested, and also just happy that I had some awareness on that at the time, that I knew. I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do with law, but I knew that law could definitely steer me in the right direction.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea that the legal studies program started, and that's amazing that you were picked out of 18 people to join as well. I was actually going to ask you about that.
It was an interesting program. Essentially, it was almost like a master's thesis program. It was pretty intense of a workload, and it was essentially all tutorial based. So we would really be in the classroom, 18 of us, talking about, the readings that we did. It was much like my law school experience was. So it was really, my first entryway into that type of legalese and learning about law in a more of a legal setting where you have one-on-one time with your professor. You're essentially getting cold called during every class, which doesn't necessarily happen, in undergrad, but it definitely happens in law school. So it started, getting us students thinking about what life would be like, doing a Juris Doctor and LLB in law.
Yeah, that's really amazing to gain that experience of law school would be in your undergrad. I feel like all universities should offer a program like that.
Yeah, I would agree. It was great. And especially, I know a lot of students get down on themselves. I speak to students a lot, and I have a lot of, that I mentor, and, they assume that in their first year of university, or even in their second or third year, they should know exactly what they want to do. And they should know exactly what realm of law they want to get into. And with some people, that may be the case. They might know, I want to get into corporate law, and then they work in corporate law the remainder of their days. But for a lot of other students, I want, much like myself, I want them to know that it's okay to just not know what your game plan is. Life throws you in different directions that you can't even foresee anyways. So chances are, even if you have a game plan, you're not going to be able to stick to it in a linear motion. You are going to be, tested and tried. But definitely having the option to pick up some legal courses in an undergraduate setting really helped me. And it really pushed me towards, trying to, write my LSAT, prep for that, and move forward with law school, and at least keep my options open. Because again, I didn't know that I wanted to go to law school. I wasn't so hell-bent on that. It was more so just an option for me at that time. And I'm so glad that I had, taken those courses and been open up to the whole field of law and like really understood, this is what family law means. International law is very different. Corporate law is very different. And I really understood different facets of law, which also helped in picking my major and helped in, getting me into the lane of family, which I'm solely practicing in today.
That's great to know. So you mentioned studying for the LSAT. So could you tell us about your experience studying the LSAT? Like how did it go? And what was your law school admission process was?
Yeah, so when I studied for the LSAT, I think it was in third year university that I started studying. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what I did to prep is that I chose the Princeton Review LSAT prep course. So instead of prepping on my own, I just knew, during summer break, I wasn't the biggest self-starter in the world at that time, especially when you're fresh out of, undergrad, you're just wanting to work and have, a bit of time off in the summer. So what I did is I actually moved in with my grandmother downtown and I dedicated myself to the month-long Princeton Review prep course. So instead of, going into work right away, or instead of, trying to self-learn, I would actually go to the University of Toronto campus where Princeton Review is located. And I did that for a month solid. And I think that's why I got such a great score on my LSAT. I got 170 out of 180, which is what I was aiming for. Yeah, and that's exactly what I got on the dot. So was very happy with my results. When I was first testing, I was not getting that score at all. And I was not getting in the 170s at all. So what the Princeton Review course really did was provide us with a lot of homework, and it forced someone like me to sit down and really just practice. And it was all about practical learning. But at the same time, they gave you a ton of tips and tricks with respect to strategy and how to maneuver your way through the LSAT, as well as tips for timing. So while we also did the practicum on, as homework or on our days off, the actual course taught so much. So I think I owe a lot of that grade to that prep course, and I recommend it to so many law students. I'm not sure about what other prep courses can offer. I just know based on my own experience, Princeton Review was great.
Yeah, I'm actually studying for the LSAT, and like I can totally agree. Like it's all about while I was studying, I realized that doing the LSAT is less about like learning the material and more about like strategizing on how to do it.
Yeah, it's much like the bar exam. I mean, the bar exam, I think the strategy, it's 7 hours long and you have 30 seconds a question. So you just have to know when to move on. And, and for me, sometimes I would just say, when in doubt, go with C, next question, because that strategy involves you really engaging in time management, which is such a large part of our profession anyways. But for the most part, I felt really, really great after writing the LSAT, just because I had practiced so much. That entire summer I had done hundreds of these tests. And pretty much what I told myself was, when I start a practice test, turn off your cell phone, close your door, and don't respond. And that really worked for me, especially in the age of technology. Everyone's hooked in Instagram and their phones and texting. I found it was really helpful. And again, at this time, I think I had a BlackBerry, but I would put my BlackBerry on my bed, turn it off, and just study. And I would just focus solely on that test. And I would do sometimes sections at a time or sometimes the full test. And I would just make sure that I was completely zoned in and that there weren't any other distractions around. I felt that really helped as well. It's all about hard work and repetition when it comes to the LSAT.
Well, I mean, it paid off and you got an amazing score on your LSAT. So congrats on that again.
Thank you.
So
anyone can do it.
Pardon?
Anyone can definitely do it. It just takes practice. I really am a believer in that, especially with these courses. It's just, if you can engage in these courses, they're a great tool to help you succeed.
Yeah, I did the Princeton Review not too long ago, actually. So I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's a great resource.
Yeah. So I also, from what I understand, your law school process is a bit different than most lawyers, and the fact that you actually went to Australia and got your Juris Doctor at Bond University, and you studied international and Canadian legal systems. I have so many questions because it's so interesting. Like you don't really meet a lot of people, especially practicing here in Canada, who decided to study abroad and study Canadian legal systems abroad. So could you tell us about your experience? going in, like deciding to go abroad? Like what made you choose? And like, do you feel like it benefited you learning about Canadian legal systems from an outside perspective?
Yeah, so my law school experience definitely wasn't average. I did apply to a few law schools here. Just, very specific. I think I applied to 3 schools. Um, my top was Queen's Law. I did get into Queen's Law. So my decision to go abroad wasn't because I didn't get in or have the scores to, move forward with the Canadian university. I chose to go abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say for me, it was the absolute best decision I ever made. The connections that I forged and the overall experience that I had was a once in a lifetime experience. And it was definitely beneficial for my career. So what I did do is I applied to Bond University as I had done a lot of research. What I wanted from my international experience, because I knew I wanted to really go internationally. My heart told me, I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the world. And for me, it was a great fit because my background was in international relations. So again, as I was speaking about before, I didn't necessarily think I would be working in law in a traditional context, which I actually am doing now. I thought I would be using the Juris Doctor as a stepping stone because of my international relations background.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, if the shoe fits, let's learn more about international law, potentially study at an international university. And I thought I might live and work abroad. My dream job at the time when I was applying for law schools was working at an NGO in New York or working for the United Nations, something in an international relations context.
Mm-hmm.
So going internationally worked within that context. Some people look at me and see what I'm doing today and they wonder why I went abroad, but at the time it made complete sense. And I will tell you, it's a great option for people not only wanting to practice international, law abroad or wanting to work for a big corporation abroad. It's a great fit for, I think, a lot of different candidates. And I think a lot more students are deciding to go abroad just because of the experience that it provides. So I did choose Bond University because unlike the schools in Europe, Bond provided you with a Juris Doctor degree. And I thought that was important as schools in Canada provided JD. I wanted a JD at the end of my name. So that was a tick off the box for Bond University in Australia. It's also a highly regarded school in Australia. I'd say it's almost like the Harvard of Australia. So I knew if I was there, that large law firms go, like the McCarthy's, of Australia would go and poach Bond law students, much like you would at a U of T here or a lot of the well-regarded universities here. So that was another tick off Bond's box. And then thirdly, when I went to the Bond orientation, which they offered in Toronto, I did realize and learn that I think the stat might have changed, but at the time, around 90% of their Juris Doctor program was Canadian, and it was a full pack program. So interestingly enough, when I chose to go to Australia and moved abroad, my entire JD program was packed with Canadians. So it was actually hard to meet Australians because I was surrounded. It was like a mini Toronto, Vancouver, all across Canada. And we had a fairly large class and mostly all Canadians. What I did learn is that a lot of my colleagues and classmates had parents that were lawyers in Canada. Some worked at really large firms. I mean, some of my classmates had parents that own like 6 firms across the GTA in Toronto. So a lot of lawyers' children decided to go to Bond. I think a lot of lawyers know that it's a well-regarded program abroad. And therefore, they pushed that on their children, or they at least educated their children about, if you're wanting to study abroad, Bond is a great option. But the main, reason I did go to Bond is because they offered the 8 Canadian electives that are required in order to essentially write your bar exam and move forward in Ontario. So what they do is you're not actually, learning Canadian content from Australian professors or international professors. They fly Canadian professors to the university, and they essentially, what my understanding is, they engage in exchanges, or some of these people are there more permanently, these professors. So I had, a criminal law professor that taught at Western. I had, a Canadian constitutional professor that taught at Queen's. So I had, these great professors that were just wanting to move abroad, essentially become expats and live that sunny Australian lifestyle. So really it was amazing. I took the 8 Canadian electives, as well as, everything else, but because we were in Australia, essentially all the Australian law, much like Canadian law, originates from England. So pretty much like the common law that we were taught was all the same with respect to, my first year of learning, especially just learning the basics. It would have been the same at a Canadian school. So that was also great. But when I went, I was actually able to transition back because I think it was about 75 average in all my Canadian courses. I didn't have to write any NCA exams at the time. I came back and I started articling right away. I know things have changed because bond was the one exception to the rule, and the Canadian Regulatory Board changed that, I think the year after I left. So that would have been like 6-7 years ago. That was changed. So I know this because classmates that graduated after me, so in a year after, 2 years after, did have to write some NCA exams upon coming home. I'm not even sure if they had to write all 8, maybe just 4 or 5 of them. But my understanding is that process was very seamless, and it was not very hard at all. It took them a couple months, and then they were all caught up. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I did not write any of the NCAs. So I would double check that with someone if you are thinking of, anyone watching is thinking of going abroad for law school. For me, I came back with my Canadian electives as well. I took family law courses abroad and other international law courses. And I came back and I started articling at one of the top family firms in Mississauga. And they also had an office in the financial district. So I started working right in the financial district on Bay Street pretty much right away, and did my articles there and was hired there as a junior. So I worked there for quite a few years.
That's amazing. Like when I was doing a little bit of research, obviously on you for this interview process, and I saw that you went to Australia, like it didn't come across my mind that like I can go abroad and study and come back here and practice. So to hear your experience, like now I just want to go to Australia and go to university there.
It was really nice to go to class and then hit the beach, go for a surf, get out of the water, go back to my beautiful apartment and go swimming at the swimming pool. Like the student living was absolutely amazing there. It's just Australia in general, they just have it down, right? They have it down pat in that they just really know how to live, and their work-life balance is absolutely amazing. So it was just such a great experience. And because Australia is so close to Asia, I traveled a lot of Asia. On school breaks, we would do trips to Bali, Indonesia. They had super cheap flights. Like you could spend like $100 and you could be in Thailand. So really, we did some amazing trips. I got to see that whole area of the world, and it's an experience I would never, ever return or change. The only thing I might do differently, if I am being quite honest, is I might have stayed there and just worked there, like articled there. Because I know it's very easy to transfer back. And a lot of people, a lot of students that reach out to me, one of their main concerns about going abroad that I'm constantly asked is, can I come back and get hired? Like, is it going to put me, in a difficult position with respect to getting a job? And I'll be quite honest in that if you're wanting to work for a top firm, especially in the corporate realm, if you're wanting to work like on Bay Street in the financial district, not a boutique firm, not even a mid-tier firm, like I'm talking corporate, they hire their summer students. So if you are wanting to go abroad, whether it's in Australia or anywhere in Europe, anywhere abroad, really, you may have a hard time getting hired, because a lot of my friends that went to school here would do a summer placement here. And then that summer placement would then, out of say that there's 5 summer students, maybe 4 of them or 1 of them would be picked to then article. So, if you're coming back from Australia, if you're coming back from abroad and you're just giving a resume to article, likely some of the majority of those big firms would have already picked their students out of those summer placements. To negate that, in the event that you did want to go to a top tier firm, what I tell these students asking questions is that you may just want to stay where you are and work there for a few years. So at Bond, again, a lot of huge firms, even like KPMG would come and try to poach students, or larger firms. If you wanted to get into a big firm and eventually transition back to Canada, what you could do is just take advantage of those opportunities, article in Australia. In my case, if you're wanting to go to Bond, work at a top tier firm for a couple of years, because Bond is so well regarded in Australia, and then look to transfer back to Canada, having that work experience under your belt. That may be an option for you. If you are a student that knows that after law school, they're okay with working at a mid-tier firm. Like I'm talking up to like 50, maybe even 100 people, or a boutique environment, like around 25 people. And if you know that that might be a better fit for you than the corporate, the corporate beast, so to speak, then I can tell you with certainty, you shouldn't have any troubles coming back. As long as you interview well, and you seem to be a good fit for the firm. And I absolutely didn't have any trouble, and you shouldn't have any trouble getting a job when you return. For me, I had 3 different job offers at some mid-tier and boutique firms with competitive hiring rates, similar to those at that job on the financial district in the financial district would be offering. So I don't want to say it was luck. It was definitely hard work, as well as a lot of strong interview prep. And as well as looking professional at the interview and just presenting myself with my best foot forward. All of those things contributed, but I can say with certainty when we are hiring and when we are looking at students, we don't care where your degree is from. We look at your grades, whether you went to a reputable school, whether it's here or abroad, because the old boys club is changing, and I've been preaching that on my social media for years. The world is a big one with social media. Everything is opened up. And the reality is that people want to travel. People want to take advantage of going abroad. And there are some absolutely great schools and institutions that are located abroad, because Canada isn't the center of the universe. There are a lot of great law schools located all over the map. So the reality is that a lot more students coming and entering into our interview processes have gone to international schools. And if anything, I do review it or look at that as a positive. But again, I'm a little biased because I also went to abroad. So it really depends on the candidate, whether they're the right fit. But there are definitely some major positives of going abroad, especially for, work-life balance, so to speak.
Okay, I think there's someone who wants to join us. I'm just going to let the student in.
Sure.
Okay, hello. So I'm just going to go back into the questions. But I remember you were saying like your articling position, how you articled at a really prestigious law firm in like the financial district. Like that's amazing. Like you said, you're already saying how like it's difficult, and then now you go and you do it. Like that's just amazing. So could you tell us like what are some ways that you prepared yourself to get that articling position? And could you also tell us about your time articling at this prestigious law firm?
Yeah, so I did a lot of interview prep. I think it's important to try to understand the firm and what makes them unique before going to an interview. I know in one of my interviews, I got stumped, and I learned fairly quickly when they asked like, well, why us? And I didn't really have a response, because I just thought, well, you have a great reputation, and they, not the firm that I got hired at, but this other firm, and probed and said, well, what about our reputation? What cases do you know that we've done? What stands out? Which lawyers do you like? So just based on that experience, I learned you really need to be prepared. So I would interview the firm, look into, whether there were any news articles on them, anything specific. And I would make sure I always went prepared. I also think it's so important, and I say this time and time again to different students asking me about the interview process, to essentially really focus on your cover letter and have your cover letter tell a story. My cover letter, for instance, said what my LSAT score was, said why I chose to go abroad, because I did know, I think more so these days, there isn't as much of a stigma, but back then, these large firms, there was somewhat of a stigma as to like, did you go abroad because you couldn't come make it here? So I outlined the fact that, that's not why I went abroad, and I outlined all that. So my cover letter completely told the narrative of my experience and what I was looking for a firm. And in most interviews, they usually ask if you have any questions at the end. And what I do in every interview that I've ever done, and for the most part, I think it's really important to know, just as an interviewee, what the corporate culture or the corporate climate is of the firm. So that's just another tip for anyone watching, wanting any interview tips. They do ask a question and you're stumped, or they've answered any other questions that you've had. I think, an important one to toss in at the end would be, can you explain what your corporate culture is like? What is the climate like working here? I think that's very important, because I think as students, when you're first interviewing, you just really want anything that you can get. But you don't really think about picking and choosing what really is the right fit for you. And I found just, with my experience with a lot of other students or new hires coming to us, or just with friends, I have a plethora of friends that work in law and are doing amazing things in law. I found a large percentage of people in law that I have spoken to aren't the happiest. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I think articling can be really tough. I think there are still some unfair standards within the articling process that need to be fixed. I mean, downtown, I know, some large firms, they will entice students with like a gym membership. But the reality is that at some of these large corporate environments, they give you a cot and you're expected to sleep over. And the working environment can be quite competitive in a way that might not necessarily align with your values. So, with that being said, it's important to ask those questions in the interview process. And, it is competitive. I understand wanting to just get, get into a firm, so to speak, because it's such a competitive environment these days. But getting to know what that firm really represents and asking yourself whether it's the right fit for you is also so important. So I would recommend doing that and asking them what their corporate culture is like, asking them, what the environment is like prior to stepping in. I think that would do, you a world of service. And I wish I had done that for every interview that I was in. But other than that, I would just say go prepared and look professional as well. It's important to look the part. I bought a suit prior to every interview and I made sure I looked professional. And just go and be confident and show that you are hardworking. What I also did is attached to my resume, I attached all of my grades from law school. And because I went abroad, I actually attached a scale as well that showed like the equivalent of, instead of ABC, they had like passes and other numerical or other like letters and numbers. So what I did is I just did the corresponding chart to show like, oh, when I got this grade, actually that's an A. So attaching your grades to the end of your resume is also something that I think is really important.
Yeah, thank you for this advice. Like, I haven't really heard anyone say this before. And I feel like it's really important. Like, I just, like, while you were talking, I realized, like, obviously, like, as a pre-law student, when I get an opportunity, I'm going to be really excited. But I don't want to be miserable working there either.
I'm not trying to be pessimistic at all. In life, no job is perfect. And I just don't want to spread falsity that, every day in your life of law is going to be absolute perfection. Because I think, it happens in a lot of professions. I've talked to a lot of doctors, lawyers, especially with us professionals. When you're working so hard, it takes around, 7-8 years to get this degree. You're so excited to step in. But the reality is it's not going to be perfect. At the beginning, you might be on some coffee runs and you're going to be learning, you're at the bottom ranking at that law firm. And I think my expectation was that it was all going to be glamorous when I entered in, and it was going to be my dream job when I started articling. And because I had, great pay and I was working at a great firm and it was in the financial district and I got to wear cute outfits to work, I was having my Legally Blonde moment, I thought, okay, my life is made. This is great. And that wasn't necessarily the case for me. I wasn't a fan of the corporate environment. I found boutique, when I switched over to boutique and more of a boutique environment, I found it was so much better for me just because I found there was a lot more paper pushing when I was in a large corporate environment. The legal work was mixed in with clerical work or admin work, which of course I understand you're doing. I mean, I've had friends that have like not left a fax machine their entire articling career. And that's just not what I was looking for. I wanted something more hands-on. So the benefit of a more boutique environment is that you might be working with a lawyer and you might be getting a lot more responsibility sooner. So that might scare you, you might need to litigate and you might not feel comfortable with litigating. You might be thrown into doing research and being one-on-one with the clients right away. Whereas at a larger firm, you might have an assistant that's doing that or a law clerk that's doing that. And you may just solely be doing case research and mixed in with administrative things. It really depends on your personality type. For me, I love, being with clients, working one-on-one, talking to clients, learning about their life situation by speaking on the phone or meeting with them in person. And I found working in a large corporate environment, you do have to, work your way up the ladder. So at first I was doing a lot of case research and more like administrative stuff. And as I progressed, I started meeting with the clients. And even as a junior, when I was hired, I didn't really have my own files. I would be working in a team of juniors to one senior counsel. So it was very different. It was much like, out of a Suits episode. It was my absolute dream job, but I learned, as the years went by, that maybe my dream job wasn't necessarily what I thought it was. And that's also okay. I think it's important for us lawyers to grow and evolve and just acknowledge that your job might not be perfect right from the get-go. But in time, with this degree, with a Juris Doctor, you will have, so much respect, and the degree opens up so many doors that you can do anything you want with it, right? And, even if you have not like the absolute best experience from the get-go, that can change. And I really want to reinforce that, because I do know a lot of young students that are articling or even junioring, and they call me and say, like, I'm not the happiest. I'm not sure if this career is for me. And some just absolutely love it from the get-go. But just, for the handful of those that are unsure or maybe not having the absolute best experience, I'd like to just tell them that it does get better. It can get better. And there are so many ways to practice law. You can do so at a large firm where it's more competitive. And look, a lot of students like that, and they're getting paid a lot to do that. So, I'm not saying every experience is bad at a large corporate firm. That is in no way the truth, right? A lot of students have great experiences. For me, I just realized that, my experience wasn't what I wanted long-term, and that I wanted more hands-on experience. I wanted, to be meeting clients daily, litigating all the time, and not so much like babysitting files or paper pushing. And that was just my experience alone. And some students call me and they have a similar experience to me. So I love talking about the fact that, when you enter your career, not to have rose-colored glasses on, it's going to be a lot of hard work. You might have to, start with some coffee runs, a lot of legal research. But after that year of articling or 10 months of articling passes, you can really dive into whatever you want to do in whatever avenue, whether that's in a large corporate setting or in a more boutique setting. There are always options.
That's good to know. Like, sometimes I feel like we just get deterred hearing these stories or like experiencing it ourselves, but it's good to know that like it will get better. Or like, I feel like sometimes we often like sacrifice stuff just so that we can like do what we think is our dream job, but like that sacrifice is preventing us from actually doing our dream job. But that is some great advice.
I think with law, especially, it's like, in my experience, the ego plays into it a lot. I think a lot of lawyers, they have a bit of ego. It's just the nature of our profession. Being confident, especially if you're litigating. I'm litigating all the time because I'm in the family realm. So I'm dealing with other litigators. And I think, just casting the ego or pride aside, I had the dream of having the large corner office on Bay Street, and I got that. And I was there, and, I had the assistant and I had the secretary, and I had a great paycheck that was consistently coming in. But deep down, I wasn't happy, and I don't want to say I was miserable, because there were aspects of the job that I love, but there were other aspects I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this the rest of my life. I don't love a lot of this. And at one point I actually thought maybe law wasn't for me, but I had spoken to someone older, and a mentor of mine had told me, look, like, you can always pivot in law. Having a Juris Doctor opens up so many doors. You don't have to do law the traditional way, working in a corporate environment, in a corporate setting. You could do it your own way. Maybe you want to be your own boss, or maybe you want to go and work for a corporation and work in-house, or, maybe you want to work in public policy or get into politics. A law degree opens up all of those doors for you, and already you're ahead of the game. If you have the JD or the LLB. So in following that advice, what I did is I pivoted, and instead of having the large corner office, I settled for working from home for 6 months. Like the first 6 months of going off on my own, I pretty much worked from home. And this was pre-COVID. So I was pretty ahead of the game, because I know a lot of lawyers are working remotely now due to the circumstances. But I decided to work remotely, and I had a virtual office downtown, essentially an office I would visit and do meetings in. And after those 6 months of just getting my corporation set up, getting everything, hiring and everything, then we, started our first office on Bay Street. So it took a little time and it took a lot of hard work, but I realized that I love the business side of law. And I think, a lot of lawyers are deterred by that. And I think a lot of older lawyers, help facilitate that conversation, saying, well, trust accounting is so difficult. Managing client trusts, reconciling trusts, dealing with trust money, dealing with checks is so, hard. And as lawyers, and in law school, we aren't taught, really the ins and outs of managing a business and how to successfully market yourself, because a lot of us don't come from a marketing background.
Yeah.
We don't have degrees in business. A lot of us might have degrees in arts going into law school. So it's a bit of a learning curve, but I would say don't let that learning curve stop you from moving forward in the event that you aren't so happy at a larger firm and you are wanting to make the shift to become self-employed. For me, self-employment offers me flexibility. I'm a female that wants to have a family, and I recognized early on at some, firms, you might not be treated as well if you decide to make the decision to have kids. And I knew that wasn't for me. And I also knew that I thrive when I'm making my own decisions and I'm, have more flexibility with respect to my working hours. I never really understood the model of having to go in and work 9 to 5 in an office, when a lot of the time for doing legal drafting, I could do that, at my desk from home. I'm working remotely today, for instance. I could do that at my desk at one of my 3 offices, or I could do that, at my laptop in the Bahamas. So the reality is, as long as we're billing out those hours, and as long as an employee of mine is billing out a certain amount of hours, I don't really care where they're doing it from, as long as the clients are happy. And again, that's more of a new age frame of thought, because that relies heavily on the use of technology, encouraging Zoom calls. Of course, we still meet clients in person. And of course, I'm in the office quite a bit, but being self-employed allowed me the flexibility to implement those types of, measures. And that I have bought a lot of software. Technology helps us with our clients. And I think our clients are a lot happier, because I think gone are the days where people want to come in and meet their 80-year-old lawyer in his, boring office, sign a piece of paper, and have to take half a day off, and, have their kids in with a babysitter in separate childcare and pay for that as well, just to come meet their lawyer. When I could conversely send them a Zoom link, send them an online DocuSign document, and have that signed virtually, and they can still chat with me and still have that in-person experience. So I think the move to being self-employed helped me facilitate a lot of those dreams that I had, that I noticed a lot of firms weren't using. And now, our legal association uses all of those things. And I think clients are really happy as a result. So again, there's so many different avenues that you could practice law within. I have friends with the same political science background as me that are now working for the government. And I've had friends that are, secondary to the mayor, working like in the mayoral office. So it's amazing what, the degree can really do.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this advice. I also, like you mentioned, like being your own boss and like obviously like running your own firm with like 2 other lawyers. I was going to ask you more about that. Congrats on opening KMS Legal in 2018. That's amazing. So
Thank
I know
you.
within your practice, you mainly focus on family law. So like things like litigations, contracts, divorces, obviously. So if you could just tell us a bit about each focus and what you find is a really challenging aspect of these focuses.
Yeah, so I specialize in family law. My associates do criminal as well as estates litigation, but I litigate in the area of family law. And I also offer more of a collaborative approach in the event clients are wanting that. Collaborative meaning allowing both partners to collaborate versus, sticking out your teeth and going to court. And so we really offer, different approaches that, may benefit our clients, that are more out of the box and more creative. With that being said, some clients, their needs, won't be met without litigating. So I'm in court several times a week. It's been absolutely crazy with COVID. What we do is we help people move forward through their divorce, settle their property issues, deal with custody and access, what's in the best interest of their children. And oftentimes when people call me, I first recommend moving forward and dealing with any issue they might have by way of a separation agreement. So we draft a lot of agreements and we work with our clientele and understanding their financial needs, their financial resources, doing calculations to determine what they might owe their ex or what might be owed to them by way of an equalization payment to deal with their property, or spousal support or child support. The list goes on. So really work with our clients and have a hands-on approach in determining what would be best for them. If they do choose a separation agreement, we work with them outside of the court process to craft an agreement. And a lot of, not only separation agreements are, popular these days, a lot of these agreements now are being tailored as, what the movies refer to as prenups.
Yeah.
What in Canada we call marriage contracts. So a lot of, our newer clients call us and they want a traditional marriage contract. Or if they don't have any plans to marry anytime soon, we call them cohabitation agreements, meaning if you moved in with your partner and you just want to ensure that your assets are safeguarded, we draft them as cohabitation agreements because you're cohabiting, and those evolve into a prenup, or what we call a marriage contract in Canada. We ensure that they're drafted in a way that you don't have to come back to us. So if you do get married in the future to that same partner, just kicks into essentially the marriage contract, and it covers you in that respect as well. So a lot of contract drafting, in the event that there are any disagreements or, we can't come to any resolve with respect to these contracts, we do a lot of mediation and arbitration to try to help our clients, sort out their issues. And ultimately, if none of those options work, or if a client comes to us and says, like, I've been sued and they need to respond, then we respond by way of responding materials. We're thrust into the court process, and it's quite rigid in that you need to meet certain dates, meet certain criteria with respect to financial disclosure. But we also assist our clients with, dealing with those matters as well in court and litigating to ensure their rights are defended. So that's pretty much what we do. The day-to-day in life for me essentially involves me getting up, walking my dog, having a cup of coffee or two, and right away at 9 a.m. we're on. I usually have a meeting with my law clerk just to strategize about what we need to do that day, if there's anything pressing or anything imminent. With family law, there are restrictions. So if, for example, a client is served and they come to me 10 days later, I know that we have a 30-day time period to respond with your responding materials. So sometimes, clients will come and want to retain us and they're at day 25 of that 30-day period. So sometimes we have to, rearrange our schedules to meet time crunches. So it can be quite dramatic in a sense, in that, there's constant rearranging of a schedule. You do have to meet certain timelines. Sometimes we're on like a crunch time, as we call it, and that, we need to get these materials in tomorrow. So it can be dramatic in that regard. But when we are, going through the day-to-day, I'm doing a ton of drafting, a ton of case research, or reading my students' research, applying that to court materials or documents, and tailoring specific parenting plans for, parents going through separation. A lot of time, we're the only one that clients call, or the first person, a person, a client might call when they're thinking of getting separated or going through the separation process. A lot of times when we get that phone call, there's been some element of domestic violence involved. There could be, a child rape or molestation. And a lot of times we're that soundboard. So a lot of lawyers shy away from family law. They say that it's too emotional and they just can't handle the stress of it all. And I particularly love the fact that every case is different. Every person's story is different. And when I'm talking to a client, sometimes my spouse jokes and says it's like a Real Housewives episode, but it can be very dramatic in that, everyone's story is so different. And we oftentimes are that very first sounding board, and almost, a therapeutic release to our clients, in that they're actually asking us for life advice. And while I have to tell my clients, you should really see a therapist, I'm not a therapist by any means. I think if you are a positive person, you like speaking to people, being hands-on with people, constantly learning about their lives, whether it's, what troubles their children are having, whether they're having issues with pickup and drop off, whether they're having, any issues with, domestic violence or abuse. If you're one of those people that, thinks that they could help others and is interested in helping others and learning from their clients hands-on, I think family law is a great avenue. There's never a dull moment. I can tell you that.
Yeah, that's great to know. Like, you seem really passionate about your job, which is amazing, because now that you say it, like, I realize, like, people are generally, like, coming to you and they're, like, their last straw of help. Like, they're generally, like, at a really tough place in their life, and, like, just talking to you will give them hope. That's just really nice. And I'll be
Yeah,
honest, after
like,
talking to you today, like I'm a lot more interested in family law and like going abroad. It's like you've changed my whole mindset now.
yeah,
So
it's interesting. I mean, I thought I would want to do criminal at one point. I was thinking about criminal, but for me, I felt family was a better fit just because, like just again, like the work-life balance of it all. You're in an office, clients are coming to you, our hours are 9 to 6.
mhm.
Uh, Whereas with criminal, I know a lot of time is spent physically at the courthouse. And I've heard some criminal lawyers get threats, and that also, like, I'm a bit, worried in that regard. So I
Yeah.
didn't go. I know it's also similar. Like, I know a lot of law students find criminal law so thrilling and they want to get into that avenue. And family law can sometimes be overshadowed by that. But I feel like with respect to constantly dealing with new things, evolving and learning every day and having, a hands-on experience with clientele, family is very similar to criminal in that regard. So yeah, it's never a dull moment. And oftentimes our files are intermingled with criminal files.
Mhm.
So a lot of times an associate of mine will be dealing with the criminal element. And I'll be dealing with the family element. A lot of times there is an intertwinement. So you're learning about what has happened criminally. And again, that's not all files. Some files don't involve any domestic violence
Yeah.
or any criminal element. It's simple separation. But for those files, and the majority of files, we do still have to do, property calculations with respect to, partners splitting up their property,
Mhm.
because people's lives are so intermingled. And in Ontario, in the event that you are married, you're entitled to what we call an equalization payment. So again, there's a lot of like accounting and knowledge that you learn when you take family law courses. But I find, even though that sounds kind of dull, if you're a student listening, you might think, okay, that sounds pretty boring. But I find that when you're doing it and it's hands-on, it's a lot more interesting, because you're not just thinking of theoretical numbers that are in the distance. Your client might be speaking to you and say, well, look, like, I inherited this cottage from my grandmother. How can we make this work so that I maybe receive less of a payout so I can keep the cottage? It seems more interesting when you're doing it. And I find fighting for my clients' rights, especially when there is an inequitable situation, is quite fulfilling in the family law context. You're dealing with children too.
Yeah.
And ensuring that they're safe and in like a safe and welcoming environment, with consistent scheduling. And I find it is very fulfilling when you know that, you've helped a child's life. So in that regard, I think family is great. Can it be overwhelming at times? Yes, I'm painting it as such a great picture about family law because I wholeheartedly believe family is an amazing avenue to practice in. But I would be lying if I said there weren't days where it is hard. And sometimes I tell my clients, like, imagine having your best girlfriend call you every day complaining about her breakup. I mean, that's my life. So have to be okay with being positive, because if you are a pessimistic person, it can weigh on you, and being in that somewhat therapeutic role and acting as a bit of a therapist to your clients can get tiresome. I find there is some burnout, as with any area of law.
Yeah.
So what I personally do is I'll just make sure every 6 months I have a vacation, and I think it just refreshes you and you come back positive, and all is well in the world, as long as you have that work-life balance. I think it's very important, especially in the family law context.
All right. Thank you so much. I have one more question before we end it off, and it's a very simple question. So, as a very successful lawyer as you are, what is an advice you would wish you could give to your younger self or to the future generation of aspiring legal professionals?
Advice for my younger self. Okay, that's a hard one. Well, I know we talked about, the moving forward in law and it not necessarily being a linear process. I set high standards for myself, and I love that I can give this advice now because I went through it. I thought that when I landed my dream job, that was the be all end all, and that's where I should be, and that I should be in a large corporate environment. And when I moved through the process and realized that I wasn't necessarily happy, it took me quite some years to make the jump to, practice on my own. So advice to my younger self would just be to enjoy the journey and not be so hard on yourself. You know, the moving forward through law isn't going to be a linear process. It might ebb and flow. You might actually end up in a practice area you didn't even foresee yourself in. You might end up in an environment or a job that you didn't even know existed or you didn't foresee yourself in, and that's okay. It's okay to not like every single, you know, avenue of your first job or even your second job. And it's okay to shift. I think it's never too late to shift avenues in life or career trajectories in life, whether you're 30 or whether you're 50 or whether you're 70. I think if you want to make a change and you're passionate about something, the money will come and success will come. I wish I could have told my younger self to just take the leap earlier and not be afraid. Everything would work out. Yeah, just really letting students know that the career doesn't have to be so linear and that you can move and traverse through the process. And as well, I know a lot of, you know, my fellow students when we were graduating were told by teachers as well as mentors, as well as maybe interview viewers as well, that you can be pigeonholed really easily in law. When you're leaving that article or when you're leaving that student experience and moving into articling, I got a lot of advice at the time saying, pick and choose wisely. Like if you article in a corporate field, you're stuck in corporate. If you article in family, you're stuck in corporate or in family law. And I would just like to say that I don't really think the pigeonholing exists. If you work hard and you know you are a good lawyer and a good human, you can switch trajectories at any point in time, and I think that you will be successful. It just may require a little bit more work, and for you to, you know, start learning from scratch once again. But it's completely doable. So don't scare yourself into thinking you're going to be pigeonholed, that you need to know what you're going to do the rest of your life when you're 25.
Yeah.
It just isn't going to happen, whether you like it or not, whether you even think you have this full spectrum of knowledge with respect to what you're going to do. Likely it won't happen anyways. So don't be so hard on yourself and just go with the flow.
All right. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you today, but this does conclude today's session, unfortunately.
Tear.
Yeah. On behalf of Pre-Law Shatters, thank you so much, Chantalle, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and join us to talk about your career as a family law lawyer. All of your knowledge and your advice was incredibly insightful. So thank you so much for your time, and just thank you so much for talking to us. And honestly, like I've learned so much just in this session. So personally, thank you. So
if you're on TikTok, add me. I'm Chantalle Alexandra on TikTok.
I will do that.
Law content. Right now I have some puppy content because I have a new puppy, but I'm going to get back into the law content because I have so many students messaging me saying we need some law content. So follow me there if you are on TikTok, and I'd be happy to chat further. If you had any other questions, anyone can just reach out to me on Instagram. It's the same thing, Chantalle Alexandra.
All right, I'll do that right when I end this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Have a great day. Pleasure speaking with you. Bye.
Bye.